It's Sunday school. And for the first time in many days, there is a 40% chance of rain right now for 1 hour in Sacramento. I'll believe it when I see it. So I'll put on my glasses. Well, for Sunday school today, and I mentioned this yesterday because I was thinking about doing it, and I'm hoping Constance will pass through here to put in her 2 cents worth on this subject. But I want to talk about UFOs. Don't ask me if I believe in UFOs. Okay, that's like asking me if I believe in magic. UFOs aren't a belief system. Magic isn't a belief system. Something either is or it isn't, and the individual's perception of is and isn't-ism is totally the individual's. I see a commercial for Nova or something on TV, and the trailer says, "The universe has no center and no edges," or vice versa. Which means that every point of consciousness, every point of awareness is the center of the universe. So there is no objective reference. What's that?
There's no out there.
There's no out there. Okay, it's all in there, and my in there is different than your in there, and both of them are, for all intent and purposes, the center of the universe. So, all I know is that when I was in Nebraska, growing up in Nebraska,
You were miserable.
I was I was a
Oh, that is.
I was a miserable little boy,
Don't put it that way.
and I had come to grips with because I was obliged to attend church and to be active in my local Methodist church, very innocuous. But my mother was sort of a blind faith, Bible thumping.
Childlike belief.
She had a childlike belief in just a few things that preachers told her about when she was young. And I pretty much early on knew that was, or I considered that to be totally irrational, totally.
You were never that childlike.
Even in my childness, I was never that childlike. And I just couldn't believe that grown-ups believe that. Or you got to be kidding me. But anyway, I was so miserable. And when somebody is that miserable, you do instinctively call out to what you know has to be the big out there. And because I really wasn't comfortable in calling Jesus or the idea of God as I was obliged to believe. But I had, since the early 1950s, I had heard a lot about flying saucers. I guess ever since Orson Welles' War of the Worlds, people had been talking about movies and things like that. Everybody was aware of the concept. Then, when the United States and then later the Soviets started to experiment with nuclear tests, nuclear detonations. Coincidentally, there was all sorts of sightings of strange saucer-like things that people were reporting, and there's no debate that there was a rash of these UFO sightings, and that led to a rash of black and white B movies about UFOs and things like that. So UFOs were in the consciousness of young people in the 50s and 60s. And as I would lay awake in my misery in Nebraska as a 9-10-year-old boy, I prayed to flying saucers because I had an inkling that there actually may be flying saucers and intelligences in the universe that may or may not have like almost supernatural powers and such. And I'd pray to the flying saucer people, I almost think that you could exist. So if you can hear my thoughts, if you can hear my prayers, take me away. Get me the hell out of Nebraska. You can perform medical experiments on me if you want. Just get me out of Nebraska. Now, unbeknownst...
It wasn't that he wanted to get out of Nebraska. He wanted to get back home to Southern California.
Oh, which is exactly what we feel like right now. We want to get back home to Southern California.
We haven't resorted to praying to the flying saucer people, so maybe that's our problem.
So, flying saucer people, come, please.
Well, whatever.
Well, whatever. Unbeknownst to me, on the other side of town, Constance was fiddling with her hair. What were you?
What? That sounds a little creepy. No, it was probably after the space race had started in Sputnik, and I was drawing spaceships when I was like in the 7th grade. Well, I was supposed to be doing something else in some class because it was boring. And I had bangs in those days, and I would take my bangs and use them as an antenna and make strange noises with yeah.
Do that noise again.
Well, I made my bangs like an antenna that went back and forth out into space I wasn't thinking of flying saucers. Well, I guess I don't know why. I was thinking there was something out there, because if humans were out there, my God, there must have been something else smarter out there.
Both of us
I wasn't afraid of them.
Had a certain amount of confidence that there were smarter beings than we were surrounded by. There were smarter beings in the universe.
Or at least people or at least some kind of intelligence that was using their intelligence in a more creative way.
In a more creative way, yeah. So, now you could call that angels if you want to look at it in that sense, but so that's the first part of the thing. And there were lots of my favorite Martian and things like that on TV that came later. But anyway, let's move ahead in time to the like 1968. I did get back to California. I guess the flying saucer people heard my prayers, and the second I graduated from.
68. Okay.
Yeah. Second I graduated from high school, I moved back to Nebraska. I wrote Constance. I moved back to California.
That's not 1968.
No, that was in 66, but I'm moving ahead to 1968 now.
You have a reason here.
There's method to my madness.
You're skipping the whole desert thing with the flying saucer thing. Okay, go ahead.
The desert thing? Oh, where I took all that acid with my brother?
Where the flying saucers, that whole place? And then you called me?
That's right. Okay.
We're doing it
It's 1960.
chronologically.
Yes, 1967.
Early.
My brother and I went out to Joshua Tree National Monument in the desert to take too much acid and not come back until we were holy men.
But what was that place in Joshua Tree?
That giant rock, Joshua Tree National Monument area, unbeknownst to us, was a hotbed of UFO activity.
According to people that we were used to call flying, well, we call, they were, okay, they were a bit touched.
They were a bit touched.
But they were interesting people. Flying saucer, or, those people.
And that area, I described the experience and the life-changing experience my brother and I had out in the desert that day. And it's all in my Life of the Spirits, or it's not all in there, my God. I talk about it. And anyway, it was after that experience in the desert, just hours after that, while I was still frying my brains out in a bar in Costa Mesa. That's where I got the idea, or that's where I was inspired to go to the payphone and call Constance back in Nebraska and propose to her.
And hypnotized me over the phone.
And I guess she says I hypnotized her over the phone, and she said,
my parents said.
Yeah, her parents actually said that I hypnotized her over the telephone.
Yeah, but they were probably right.
And believe me, I wasn't consciously doing anything, okay? Including the fact that it was her birthday. I had totally probably...
You didn't know.
I didn't know. So, but anyway, to make a long... UFOs, we're talking about UFOs.
And these stories are not proof of anything. They're just coincidences that happened in our lifetime, which we go, wow, look at all these chain of coincidences that happened in our lifetime. And
they probably don't mean anything to anybody else because they are from our particular point of view, and you've got your particular point of view.
And if you're old, and when you get old, you can track a whole bunch of coincidences in your lifetime too. Right.
Okay. To make a long story short, Constance came out. We got married, and almost immediately moved in with a young Quaker couple and their 4 kids, and a lot of cats. And
so we could teach the people at UCI, when UCI was new, how to be hippies. As if I have no idea.
We literally hired ourselves out for luxurious room and rent.
We had a balcony, shared the bathroom with the children, who were angelic, and had, well, anyway, paradisial get-togethers with people from the neighborhood in front of the fireplace with food and weird music, and I mean weird.
Ron, the man, was a professor at the brand new University of California, Irvine, and we lived in University Park with them, and we actually served as teaching the liberal establishment, anti-war, white liberals
who were the sweetest, smartest, kindest people. Interesting.
And we were teaching them how to be hippies.
They asked us to babysit their children and teach them how to play guitar and things like that. I mean, they left us with their children.
They turned their families over to us. Constance babysat. I gave guitar lessons, and Ron and Nancy hosted lavish sit on the floor
And put up with
dinners.
us because we were too dumb to help them out in any way.
We taught them how to smoke marijuana.
Well, I hadn't had any yet.
Constance is a late bloomer. Anyway, I'm going to pick this up. I'm going to read a little something here and then break back into extempore. In March of 1968, we started shopping for a larger home out in the nearby canyons and forests where we could establish a private communal base. It was working so well in the suburbs. We didn't want to move too far away from Ron's job at the university. On April 4th, our plans changed. The assassination of Martin Luther King plunged us into a state of tangible paranoia. Timothy Leary was advising folks to turn in, tune on, and drop out. We were already well tuned in and turned on. Nothing remained now but to drop out.
You did go to hear Timothy Leary speak, too.
Yeah, we saw Tim Leary. It was awesome at the University of Irvine. He sat on the stage floor surrounded by flowers like a yogi
On an oriental rug.
on an oriental rug. He was hilarious.
The rest of the panel was in chairs, of course.
Right. The subculture grapevine was humming with tales of a utopian life in southern Oregon. We heard of a magical place called Tequilma, a tiny village on the Illinois River near the California border. And this is near Cave Junction and Grants Pass, if you put that in perspective, where land was cheap and the valley was filled with beautiful people just like us.
Or it would be.
It was a crack in time. 1967 and 68, 69 is a crack in time. It was like there was a whole culture of people that never met each other but could instantly.
No internet. This is what you have to realize.
No internet, television hardly did anything.
Radio was mostly music. Was good music.
Right.
Nobody was telling anybody to do this. It was just in the air or on the smoke.
People recognized each other. You know, everybody gives a peace sign now. Well, that was rare.
And you were driving down the freeway. Well, anyway, when we packed up.
Driving down the highway anyway, you just see people walking down the highway, and their hair wasn't all that long yet, and their clothes weren't.
People recognized each other by their aura.
This
is not even a joke.
You could spot people by their aura, and they could spot you, and they would do that. It was wild, actually. Okay. There was even a mysterious wizard, a French-Canadian pranic healer and follower of Yogananda, we were told, who lived in a renovated barn by the river.
It is what?
And he was selling property next to his. This is what we heard. Okay. Well, let me continue. This sounded too good to ignore. Mark and Ron made an exploratory, my brother Mark and Ron made an exploratory trip and determined that Tequilma would be our Shangri-La. Before returning, they rented a large house for us on Waldo Road near the Tequilma community. The Waldo house had electricity and indoor plumbing and would afford us the opportunity to wean ourselves from urban luxuries before we plunged completely into the primitive world of rural hippiedom. Our plan was to headquarter there until each couple could buy land that would be suitable for building our own cabins. On May morn, after selling nearly everything we had except guitars and books, Constance and I set out for Tequilma, along with Mark, his wife Margaret, Ron and Nancy, and their 4 kids and 13 cats. We hope to build our own homes and live quiet lives of fasting, meditation, and study. There we intended to achieve perfect illumination before the world blew apart.
Well, that's kind of close, but you left out the part
Yeah, well,
that I did. Well, you want me to talk or not?
yes.
In preparation for this trip, we bought a bunch of stuff to take with us. So we packed our books and I painted furniture so it would all, so we could completely unfold a jewel box wherever we decided to unpack for our little house. And anyway, I remember painting furniture and packing stuff because you didn't do any of that. Or
No,
think about
of
it
course
anyway.
I didn't do
Or
it.
think about it.
Yes, Constance had painted a hobbit, comfortable hobbit furniture that we could just unfold wherever it is we went to. It was very magical. UFOs, we're talking about.
Well, it's a setting.
Right. We eventually, we met the wizard, the French
I
Canadian.
never thought of him as a wizard.
We didn't think of him as, we thought of him as a yogi because
He would sit and meditate for hours.
he would sit and meditate for hours. He was, Gary Rossignol was his name, and his wife Diane. And it was Joseph Gary Rossignol. Now, they lived together in that renovated, semi-renovated barn along the Illinois River. And they lived there with their son, Andre, who might be watching this. If so, hi, Andre. I know you're a Facebook friend and you comment. So Gary was French Canadian, and he worked at night at the dairy. So he got up
early morning.
at night and early morning at the local dairy. Gary and Diane had moved to that area partly because the area was designated by the UFO enthusiasts and you'd almost say cultists. Was it Dan Fry?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know the name.
But there was a culture of UFO enthusiasts that zoned in years before and
The Oregon Vortex?
and established themselves in that southern Oregon area surrounding the Oregon Vortex. And a vortex is like I guess you would say a mini magnetic pole. There's several of them. There's quite a few of them all over the world, but they're literally poles. Okay, magnetic poles, just like the North Pole and the South Pole, only there's mini poles. Just like there's main chakras in the human psychic system, and then there's multiple.
Well, they're magnetically detectable because airplanes go awry. Their systems would go awry and everything as they flew over, so they avoided the area.
They're real life things. You measure them with.
The state had like a tourist thing over the vortex where we went to visit anyway.
So there is, yes, Constance, there's a tourist place at Gold Hill, Oregon, and I'm sure it's still there, which is the center of the Oregon Vortex.
And it's kind of hokey. It's like touristy.
Yeah.
Sweet people, but yeah,
There's
at the time.
it always had a air of mystique to it because Indians would not go into it because birds and other animals were reluctant to go into it. You take a baby into the vortex. The vortex is literally an energy sphere or a magnetic sphere, half above ground, half below ground. So the area affected is a circle. So it always had this air of mystique among the Native Americans. And in the late 1800s, they actually set up, miners and things, set up an assay office on the property. They built a building there, and the building eventually started to tip like that. And all the trees in the area bend toward the center of the vortex. It's a wild place.
It's very slight, but it's
Yeah, it's slight. But Einstein spent time studying the effects of the Oregon Vortex. And to do that, there's scientific stuff where they laid out, it took 28 days for them to level an area into it because they had to
I don't know.
do some calculation with a lunar cycle too, because that affects things. Well, anyway, airplanes will not. It's off limits for navigation over
That's
the.
all the aside from what Lon's going to say that we talked to the.
Yeah. So us hippies all got together one day, probably in our Volkswagen van.
Because it was a touristy thing to do.
It's a touristy thing to
and
do.
it was fun, and it sounded, you know.
So we went down there to see. There's a mystery house. It seems like you're walking uphill and you're walking downhill, and people get a little shorter.
Balls roll uphill and down.
Yeah, it's just like any of those mystery houses. Only this house started to tilt like that because of the vortex. Anyway, it's curated and by a state park or
Something like that.
it was like a ranger. He had a funny ranger hat and uniform and everything else, and he gave the tours to the place. And there were just other kind of lame people, the muggles. We were there, us hippies were there with some muggles. And the guy just gave a perfectly straight thing. He talked about Einstein, talked about the fact that the vortexes have an opposite vortex on the opposite side of the Earth, and the Oregon Vortex was the twin of the vortex that was right under the Great Pyramid at Giza. And all of us hippies went, "Oh, wow."
Because we were young.
Because we were young. But anyway, when the Muggles tourists sort of drifted to the side, the park ranger almost whispered to us hippies without us saying anything, and he said, "You know they refuel here." And he said it just like that, didn't he?
As if we knew what they was, because we lived there.
As if he knew.
As if we knew what they meant,
Yeah.
because we lived there.
He said, they hover just above it. And when they reach the right point, they can travel anywhere in the universe at the speed of thought. And we went, after the hair came down from our heads, we went, wow. Okay. Be that as it may, who knows any of this stuff? All we know is that we went up there to be good yogis. We went up there to buy land, to drop out and everything else. And all of a sudden, we were plunged into this UFO
Bunch
world
of coincidences.
too, as if they all were related to each other. So we were told, Gary Rossignol, the wizard, we almost immediately found out that he had written a book, and that he was proudly said that he's semi-literate himself, and his English wasn't his first language. He's French Canadian. And we asked him, well, how did you write this book? He said, I didn't write it. I channeled it.
He actually used the word channeled, I do believe.
He used the word channeled?
I
Yeah,
think so.
he channeled it.
And he had a collection of cassette tapes in those days, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Cassettes?
Called Message from the Space Brothers.
Right, where of him channeling.
Right.
His wife would tape for him, I'm sure, while he was
Right.
doing it.
And so they were all on tapes and stuff, and we were just awed by the barn, what Diane had done to the interior of the barn.
They had, what, how high was, well, barns are like sometimes 2-3 stories tall. Well, they had it was a library inside half of it. They had their bedroom, which I never saw, but it was a library, and it was a fantastic library. Great Japanese garden books, and I mean, it was awesome. And then there was a potbelly stove in the very middle, and then there was a beautiful wood stove for cooking over but in the kitchen area. And anyway, it was you go inside this little door, and it's 10 times bigger than you think anything could be by looking at the outside.
The rooms were created by bookcases.
Yeah.
Bookcases were the walls. It was awesome.
And so were they.
And when we finally left the Waldo house after a few months, Ron and Nancy wanted to go into a more organized commune at Sunny Valley. And they and the kids joined the Sunny Valley commune. And later we saw them on the cover of Life magazine. And you can still see that. Yeah.
Well, in fact, it was a huge article, many pages.
Yeah.
But you can, Time Life has, because I worked at Newport Beach Public Library for 10 years, and Time Life has a book set of the decades. And I don't know what they started, the 1900s, of 10 years at a time, obviously, decade. And they have the 60s. And the main thing you can find a picture of it's 2-page picture of Ron, Nancy, and the family in the teepee, as the epitome of hippie culture in the 60s. Anyway.
Okay.
In that book.
We moved into a one-room shack. Almost. Yeah, it was a one-room shack.
It was one room, but it had like a connecting storeroom that they used for something.
Right behind the barn. Our little house that we moved to was right behind Gary and Diane's barn.
It was between the river and the barn.
There was a water pump, hand pump.
How far away from that? A short walk from the front of the house.
Yeah. And an outhouse.
In back of the house.
Which we shared with Gary and Diane. And we bathed every morning in the river, in the Illinois River, which was never warm.
It was spring fed. Along the edges, you could see the springs feeding the river. You could drink out of it. You could bathe in it, and you could wash clothes in it, but you didn't want to get any icky detergent or anything in there.
Yeah.
It was crystal clear, and a modest sized river. I mean, you can easily how far across?
Well, anyway, we met other local people that were setting up preliminarily similar to us, and one of them was David Dunn. And David Dunn was also from Costa Mesa, California. And he had...
my fault.
Oh, yeah, we're going over this morning. Sorry.
It's my fault. I'm taking a break from...
And David Dunn was the concertmaster of the then Orange County Symphony He was a violin virtuoso. Later on, a few years later, he would be our bass player and our violinist for Charlie D and Milo, but that's a whole nother story. Anyway, one of the people we moved up with was our friend with the Scotty dog. What was his name?
I swear I can't even remember the Scotty dog's name, but I remember him.
Anyway, he was a very handy woodsman kind of guy, and he immediately, after securing a little land from Gary, right by the river's edge, literally hear the river going, and the forest and the hills.
It had not been logged out or burned out.
Hadn't been logged. It was oh God, it was. Anyway, he actually built a full-blown bona fide teepee, a real teepee, right by the water's edge there. And that was his cabin for a while. Well, one night, early on, he invited us over to the teepee and a few other of the local hippies. I don't know if we ate anything or if it was a picnic or anything.
Might have been something.
But to come over to the teepee, and he lit a fire, and we sort of plopped down, made ourselves comfortable outside of the teepee. And David Dunn came with his $1 billion violin
and his talent.
And serenaded us. Well, I remember him playing the Brahms Hungarian.
Gypsy violin music.
Gypsy violin music, okay. by the Illinois River. Okay. Talk
in the dark.
In the dark. And the stars so clear. And right in the middle of this gypsy violin concert by the river in front of the teepee.
And pure bliss.
And we're not smoking marijuana even. And we're not drinking. There wasn't any up there.
They were hippies without drugs. Only the city speed freaks had drugs, and they were not nice people.
Yeah.
Well, they might have been before the speed, but not afterwards.
Right in the middle of this concert, we hear
a low hum. A big low hum, like vibration.
Big low hum. And we stand up and try to look in the sky from where it's coming. And in our field of vision, it was that big in our field of vision.
What? I don't know what that means. Don't do that. That means nothing.
It was big enough for us to see a giant cigar-shaped object.
With like fire it went in like a cigar would have.
And
it was barely above tree level. It was above tree level, but helicopter away of tree level.
As close as a low-flying helicopter. It was above the tree line, but just barely.
It was a little lower than a giant dirigible would be.
Yeah.
Which is kind of what it kind of...
It looked... And
it was just dark, and the sky was dark too, because of course there were no street lights and stuff then, so no moon out.
But it was going at an unusually slow.
It was almost hovering, okay?
It was almost hovering, okay?
You could have ridden a bicycle faster than that.
And it just followed along the Illinois River, and we just stood there with our hippiness and watched it go by, and nobody said a word, okay? And when it finally disappeared...
Which it did, must have just gone straight up. I can't even remember what happened.
We don't even know how it disappeared. We sat back down, and
probably
Dave Dunn picked up his bow and finished off his Brahms. From then on, every night we went out to look, we saw something. And the most common experience, almost night after night, we had a little, a very thin old mattress pad or something, and we'd put it out right by our little cabin, and we'd lay on our backs and just look up at the night sky, and it's incredibly clear, and we just look at the stars. Just look at the stars. That in itself was awesome. And somebody told us how to do this, okay? And we'd look at the stars, and then all of a sudden, one of the stars would move.
It would usually be a bright one, of course.
Yeah, a nice bright one.
Would move in a straight line.
Move in a straight line. And we'd all say, God, did you see that? Yeah, the one over there. Yeah, yeah. And then it would stop. And said, keep looking at it. Keep looking at that one. And and in relation to all those other stars, it would go up.
It would turn at right angles.
It would turn at right angles and then stop for a minute. And then we thought, I wonder if it will respond to our thoughts. I don't know how much.
As if our thoughts were
important, right?
Well, even focused enough to send it.
Okay. Anyway, that happened every night.
I forgot to say it. And after they would stop, and they would sometimes they would like flash a little bit, and they would just shoot away and be gone.
And be gone.
It'd be completely disappeared. I mean, and it wasn't like this was just happening to us, or we were all on drugs.
No, it happened to everybody.
And we didn't first tell somebody, and then they said, yes, it happened to me, and they didn't tell us first, and yes, it happened to us too. When we get together, people would say, this is happening to us, this is happening. And then we find out that all the women in the community were having strange dreams.
Yeah. And that could have been a phenomena of our cultural thing and not in the city. Okay. One night, or one evening, it was in the evening, I had some occasion to, and all of this is, nobody thinks a thing of it anymore. And Gary Rossignol, who's channeling messages from these people being recorded and everything else. Maybe Andre knows what happened to this material. Is continuing to. He gets a kick out of us hippies being all amazed by this. No, this is normal stuff.
Well, not only that, but we're amazed by it. But I swear, it is like 1% of our conversation or thoughts.
Yeah.
We're not really making a big deal out of it. We're just talking about it now because it sounds so, but it was not really a big deal. It was common.
Hippies get together, we talk about where can we get some wholesale soy sauce, and things like that. And oh, by the way,
you want to trade some peanut butter for canned chicken.
Yeah, right. Anyway, and this will be it for today. I've never gone this long, but it's Sunday school. One evening, it was still light. I was walking from our little cabin to go talk to Gary or Diane in the barn. And I just happened to look up, and there is a full-blown 1956 B-movie flying saucer, just maybe 100 feet above the barn. I mean, it was right there, and I posted a picture, a fantasy picture of a flying saucer on my Facebook page today because it looked almost exactly like that one. And that got my attention. That blew my mind. And it was going real slow, slower than an airplane an airplane would have stalled going that slow. And I was so excited. And I don't even know if I called out to anybody. But I started to follow along in its direction, okay? And almost the faster I walked, it kept up with me. And by the time I got to the front door, or the side of the barn where I was going to turn into it, it did the strangest thing. It was moving along like that at a steady pace, and then all of a sudden, in my field of view, it appeared to shrink. But it wasn't shrinking. It was moving away at such a high speed that it was appearing to go like that in my field of vision. And at a right angle to where it was going, or a 45-degree angle, and disappeared just like that. Okay, do I believe in flying saucers? Well,
we've been watching novas and stuff about billions and billions of galaxies.
Right.
Yeah, so I'm, you know. And Gary's tapes were like, but from what we gleaned from what he told us, it was all very positive, almost like yogis talking to you and stuff. It was very positive. None of it was scary. It was all brotherly love, and wonderful stuff.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
Wasn't it?
Yeah, it's great stuff, loving stuff.
And so I'm just thinking right now, maybe the Earth is in trouble. Maybe we're all desperate as sixth graders and should at least pray to flying saucers.
Start praying for goddamn flying saucers.
No, I don't know. Not really that. But I mean, you know.
But anyway, the when you start to think about the fragility of time and space, we don't have to even grapple with the problems of the speed of light and things like that. When you take, we know that time is, as we think of it, doesn't exist, and neither does space. Okay, so it's not a matter of these people transcending natural laws in order to manifest to our perception. It's our perception that is so limited, we're only seeing a small cross-section of things, and things that appear to pop in and out to us are constant in a bit more complex dimension. So
and that's not even unusual for him to say that, because I'm reading this fantastic new book by Ed Yong called An Immense World, and it's about how animals perceive the world with their senses, because they've got a lot of ways of detecting things now. And it's just as, I mean, their senses are so different than ours, and ours are so different from theirs. And some, of course, some are the same, but you know, who smells and who sees with their feet and stuff like that, or smell, taste, anyway.
Well, anyway,
it's the whole world is full of aliens right now that we're so have such terrible perception we can't even tell
right
what's happening on our own Earth with the animals.
So anyway, that's our Sunday school talk on UFOs. I haven't seen or tried too hard to even look at anything.
No, and we actually don't think about this very often.
No.
We just joke that they arranged our marriage, but we're not joking.
Yeah. Flying saucer people arranged our marriage. For some purpose, for amusement, I believe.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Okay, Sunday school's over. I'm sorry
My
to...
laundry is done. I have to hang it on the line.
It's time to stop. Continue to be good to yourself and be good to each other. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
Love is the law, love under will.
See you tomorrow.